This movie is basically an episode of Rick and Morty without Rick.
If you're a liberal who's a person of faith, you have more room to just kind of go into the industry, or at the very least, you give yourself permission to just go into the industry and make one the old-fashioned way.
Nobody likes being preached at.
Beth intimidates me and makes me feel insecure about myself as a man.
Every story has a lesson, whether you're intending it or not.
I'm like, actor.
That's incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Silver Retention Podcast. Today we're going to talk about two very different but very fun films. Brink of War by Angel Studios and The End of Oak Street, produced by J.J. Abrams. And I'm looking forward to End of Oak Street. I think that's going to be a really fun conversation, but I want us to start with Brink of War, which is something that I know I was excited to see, more so than I thought I would be, just based on the initial trailer. And I believe you were excited to see as well for a variety of different reasons.
This one wasn't on my radar, honestly, until you brought up you really wanted to see it. I've not been the most thorough moviegoer in the last 6 to 8 months. Largely,
you're better than I am, that's for sure.
Largely because my schedule's different than it was when I was at the peak of my moviegoing, when I had a more traditional 9 to 5, and I was a longtime AMC A-list member, but the nearest, I'm not going to go to Pottstown every time I want to see a movie when we've got like half a dozen theaters closer than that. So I've been spottier than normal. Usually I keep pretty good track of what there are trailers for running and what's kind of on the schedule. I'm starting to get better about it now that we're covering new releases on this show. But yeah, no, I had barely any exposure to The Brink of War until you mentioned wanting to cover it for the podcast. So based on those expectations and your anticipation of it, do you feel like met, exceeded, did not exceed?
I would say met.
Met.
I very much enjoyed this film. The reason I was excited by it is because I loved the premise of the idea. I knew nothing, still don't, of the actual historical elements of this movie. But the idea of having Jeff Daniels and Jared Harris playing Reagan and Gorbachev meeting on an island to essentially try and end the Cold War, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think...
Hard to screw up a premise like that.
Right. And high level, this felt like essentially a slightly conservative Aaron Sorkin type film.
It's a very good way to put it.
Yeah. And it's partially because I'm familiar with Daniels in The Newsroom, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. I wish it didn't get canceled. And... Harris, obviously, I loved him in Chernobyl. I thought he did a great job here as well. It was funny with the context of Chernobyl, seeing him go from somebody who was essentially explaining things to Gorbachev to now being Gorbachev. That was fun.
It's pretty cool. Jared Harris stole the show for me. He's my favorite part of the movie by far.
Yep.
We'll get into the characterization of Gorbachev, but yeah, that I agree. I'm fully with you on that. He was incredible.
Yeah, and I really liked the Nancy Reagan elements of it. And then what was Gorbachev's wife's name?
Raisa,
yeah. And then the journalists, his subplot characters were pretty fun. Overall, just like very well constructed movie, really cool. Some things I loved, some things that surprised me, and we'll get into that later. But I'd love to get into a little bit of the context and backstory behind this.
Yeah, so essentially 1986, Gorbachev reaches out to Reagan and says that he wants to have a summit. And he says it should be on neutral territory, either Reykjavik, Iceland, or London. Reagan says Iceland. So they met kind of hastily. The actual logistics of getting it set up went very quickly. Set up this meeting, and they went. And the film covers pretty accurately. There's some things that are streamlined. Obviously, you can't hit every issue in a 2-hour film, but pretty accurately the fact that they got all the way up to, can we agree to end nuclear weapons forever in the world? Can we completely disarm ourselves in 10 years and convince our allies to disarm in 10 years? However, there was a major hang-up, which was that at this time, Reagan and the American defense world were interested in researching something called SDI. It was essentially a missile defense system that was based in outer space. and that broke long-standing precedent since the beginning of the space race that space would not be used for military endeavors. Soviet Union was obviously not happy about that, especially because not just the space precedent thing, but also the fact of this caused an imbalance in the Cold War at this point. The U.S. is now safer from a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union than the Soviet Union would be from the U.S. Again, this was in the research stage. This was just something that they were investigating. This didn't exist. Gorbachev, in the real meeting, wanted to minimize SDI as much as possible. He didn't love the idea that this was a thing that the Americans might put together. And Reagan saw this as a shield. He was not happy that Gorbachev wanted to reduce this or control this. But for the sake of this agreement, they basically came to a compromise that was, all right, well, while the nukes are being reduced to zero over the next decade, we will not put SDI into practice. We will just study the capabilities, and we'll wait till there are no more functional nukes in the world before we build this missile defense system. And this is depicted in the film, so this is a spoiler, but this is also the case in real life. They could not come to an agreement on whether or not this study could be field tested. Reagan wanted to be able to go out into the field and test if they could actually stop missiles this way, and Gorbachev said, no, that's too close to enacting it. That's too close to the line. You can test it in a lab, in a laboratory, but we don't want you taking it out and field testing it. And Reagan's like, what do you mean I can't field test it? What are we going to be able to accomplish in a lab? There's only so much. And so over the word laboratory, this agreement blew up. However, because they'd made so much progress, it laid the foundations for a little over a year later, Gorbachev and Reagan to meet again at the White House, where they did sign a treaty that was instrumental in both reducing arms, not unfortunately to zero, that definitely did not happen, but in reducing the number of international weapons that these powers both had, and played a no small role in helping the Cold War end 2 years after that. So that's kind of the major context. This is just for me reading up on it this morning, but I was impressed to read through and find like, oh, they kind of hit the nail on the head with most of what these issues were. The only major thing that I have questions about is that, according to the Wikipedia page for the summit, the concern Gorbachev has about sharing, because at one point Reagan offers, well, we can just share SDI with you, so then there's not an imbalance. And in the movie, Gorbachev says, well, you don't even share milking machines for agriculture. Why would you share this? We don't believe you. According to the Wikipedia page, it was oil drilling technology was the one that Gorbachev cited as being the reason why he doesn't trust that Reagan will share science with him. It was not a sourced line. There was no footnote in that line on the Wikipedia page, so I don't know if that's the case or not. But it was interesting that it would be an interesting change to intentionally make, I suppose, to kind of humanize Gorbachev, which this film does a really good job of. And I think if we can get into this at this point, I was kind of expecting this to be just the Reagan movie. Knowing who's sort of behind this film.
What do you want to go into a little bit of backstory about Angel Studios and kind of their background, because I think that's also laying an important foundation for what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Angel Studios is known for their role within sort of the faith-based film world. And they came onto the scene with their first big release was Sound of Freedom. And the idea of Angel Studios was essentially bringing into the faith-based world a little bit more of the sort of Hollywood legitimacy and operating in a similar way to the way that major studios and distributors do. They've had, in my opinion, a higher caliber of just like production value than most, even something as high profile as the Kendrick brothers. This has consistently been a step up from this company. They have bigger name actors. Director wise, nobody like super notable, but they do have some good directors they use again and again. Alejandro Monteverde's a a fairly talented director. He did Sound of Freedom and I believe also Cabrini. But that has not been without their controversy. Sound of Freedom was released amidst Jim Caviezel, the lead actor, expressing pretty staunch right-wing political opinions when he would promote the film. And that sort of cast a shadow over the company in a way that they haven't been able to claw out of. Despite the fact that most of their movies I wouldn't call overtly partisan. I really liked their film Sketch, which was kind of an E.T.-inspired film about a family movie about a little girl who draws monsters in a notebook as a way of dealing with her grief. Her mother passed away. And there's this magic pool near her property, her family's property. She drops the notebook in and the monsters come to life. And it was just a really good, like, okay, it's very familiar. It's got this Amblin vibe to it, but it also has this metaphor about, you know, using creativity to sort of process inner demons by drawing these, you know, cartoon monsters, and they come to life. You have to fight them in the way that you have to kind of overcome the things that are plaguing you psychologically. So they've done stuff like that pretty much anybody can sit down in and enjoy and not really feel like their ideology is being called into question by the movie that they're watching, which most people don't like. If you go into it with an academic point of view, I enjoy watching films that come from different worlds in that sense. But if you're trying to go see a family movie about cartoon monsters, you probably don't want to be lectured about who you should or shouldn't be voting for. So I appreciate that when they do films like that, but they also do other stuff that does have more of an overt bias to it. And so knowing that, I expected that this was going to be like, look how awesome Ronald Reagan was. Look at him kicking Gorbachev's ass and ending the Cold War. I was very pleasantly surprised to find that Gorbachev was portrayed in having just as much appreciation for his responsibility in caring for his people that Reagan does. He obviously believes that his system of government that he exists in is superior, and the film does a really good job of backing away from him and letting Gorbachev have his moment to defend communism. And in a way that, you know, some faith-based stuff, you know, I mean, I'm kind of interchangeably using faith-based and conservative political. Faith-based films tend to be made by conservatives. There are, if you're a liberal who's a person of faith, you have more room to just kind of go into the industry, or at the very least, you give yourself permission to just go into the industry and make one the old-fashioned way. Martin Scorsese would be a great example of this, somebody who makes a lot of films that have a lot of portrayal of Catholicism in a positive light, but he never felt that he would be unwelcome because of his political views, and so he just went right into the normal industry. So anyway, having said that, so anyway, the point I was about to make with that was, you know, something like, I think of God's Not Dead, which is one of the highest grossing faith-based films of all time, has Kevin Sorbo playing this atheist that is able to, because of the premise of the movie, is able to kind of argue for atheism in certain scenes. But the movie essentially is about how he's this guy that's in denial of God, that he actually does, part of what you kind of like get to with the third act reversal of that movie is that he actually does acknowledge emotionally that there's a God. He just has so much of a chip on his shoulder because of things that he's gone through in life that he builds this intellectual facade around being an atheist, which is a pathetic way to portray your opposition if you're making an ideological movie. So I very much appreciate they did not do that with Gorbachev. And Jared Harris just does such a good job of selling just the burden that he has of knowing that his people are in breadlines, knowing that there's suffering going on, and not feeling like he has a way to address that because the nature of the Soviet government is such that he has generals that are, you know, are going to push back. And they essentially control him, even though he is in the gilded cage of the premiership, because they don't have checks and balances in that government. So that was really one of the most compelling parts, if not the most compelling part of the movie for me.
I completely agree. Yeah, I really like the fact that, you know, despite what Angel's intentions may or may not be, they really let both sides of the argument breathe in terms of capitalism versus communism, and both sides get really good monologues, but also both sides are very humanized. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was an intent from the creators of this, from the people who were on the production, that they wanted to show the pros and cons of both sides. And they wanted to show that they're really not all that different. It's the same exact problems, it's just different sources. And there's a lot of recognition and empathy, not just between Gorbachev and Reagan within the film, but also, I think, within people from different ideologies who might come and watch this movie. It's recognizing that neither system's perfect. Both systems have their flaws. They have different solutions to each other. And that just comes down to a different value structure. And you can argue about which one is more successful than the other, but there's no doubt that the entire reason for one's existence over the other is a basis entirely founded in values.
Yeah.
And I think this was a really, really, really good job. And I did like the actual visualization of the closing of the gap of the value divide, which was the shrinking table at the one point. It was jarring at first. And then as it repeated, you recognize, oh, this is you just really emphasizing the point that we're almost there. Mm-hmm. We're almost like fully shaking hands and ready to walk forward together. And then, of course, there's that one word. And you're left sitting there being like, why couldn't you have let the one word go? Why couldn't you recognize that all of this is on your back? And the whole point is that if you want to prove to the communists, to the USSR, that you don't need a shield, why would you keep developing it? If the whole point is to go to nuclear zero, and you're trying to sell the fact that you can trust each other to go to nuclear zero, you shouldn't need a shield if there's no swords.
And that ends up coming to be the reversal at the end of this film, where Reagan admits to George Scholes, played by J.K. Simmons, that he didn't really, it doesn't matter as much to him walking away with nuclear zero. What mattered to him, what mattered to him in both in real life and in the movie is winning the Cold War. He was there to win. And despite the fact that I am fairly certain how the filmmakers feel about Ronald Reagan, the film, I think, inadvertently does a really good job of showing, like, yeah, this guy did screw world peace over. Because if he had essentially said, look, I'm content with them existing with a system that I think is flawed and digging their own grave without my involvement, if it means that there are no more nuclear weapons and we can essentially demonstrate for the first time in the history of the human race that we can be trusted to not use the power of destruction over our fellow man. And it was just staggering and kind of depressing that, like, we could be living in so much different of a world if Reagan had been a little, maybe humble is the right word, but if he, at the very least, if he had the sense to put the greater good of humanity over an ideological victory.
Well, that's the thing, is like, you're going to have people be like, yeah, but the ideology was human rights. And it's like, appreciate that. Heard. Human rights are important. We should fight for equality and protection of all human life when and where possible. Nuclear zero is probably the biggest human rights victory of all time. And the thing, it could have been. And the thing is that you can look at it and say, yeah, but we don't want to compromise on it. It's like, well, the whole point was compromise. And it's also picking and choosing your battles. Yes, conditions probably would have still been bad in the USSR as a result of that after the deal, but conditions for the world would have improved to a point in which addressing the conditions in the USSR would have been easier.
That's the thing. If they get nuclear zero at Reykjavik, what is their next summit going to be? Like, what else, if they pull that off together and they set a firmer groundwork for their partnership in the coming years, well, they can tackle whatever the hell they want next time.
Yeah, maybe next time is, hey, if you get rid of the gulags, we give you, in this movie, the milking machines, in real life, the oil drilling technology. Or like, hey, if you reallocate certain elements of your economy so that way it's market-based, so that way people can regulate themselves a little bit more and not go hungry, we'll give you better tractors.
Yeah.
So that way you can double your capacity for making food. And it's like, that's the thing, is like, once you get to nuclear zero,
If you can get to nuclear zero in 30 hours of deliberation,
you
the world is open to you.
and it's just, it's absolutely an instance, and this is more of a criticism of the actual history than the film, but it's a recognition of like picking and choosing your battles at the right time, being capable of compromising for the bigger picture, and then dealing with the details later is not weakness. That's intelligence. That's wisdom. That is the capacity to make the tough decision for the right reasons at the right time. And it's unfortunate that didn't happen in real life, but that's history. Let's get into the details of the movie itself.
Was there anything else in particular that really like jumped out at you?
It was mutual. It was Jeff and Jared's humanization of both of these characters. I'm not somebody who has a particular affinity or recognition with Reagan or Gorbachev for that matter. So I was kind of a clean slate for both of them. I wasn't really exactly sure how to think or feel about either of them. At the end of the day, though, I really liked the little details that they provided about each. Even just the Reagan character, like spilling some stuff on his shirt, or what was it? There's a mausoleum of death or a moratorium of death or whatever in the hotel room with all of the the animals on
with
the
the
walls.
reindeer head. The reindeer bit was incredible. That
It was great.
hilarious.
Like there was perfect little elements of comedy, sprinkled in throughout. I think it was the level of humanization of both sides and allowing them to breathe that was definitely my favorite part. I also really liked the cinematography was really solid. There were a couple of shots that I was intrigued by. There was one bit where I was surprised by the usage of zooms
Okay.
in the film, especially considering it wasn't consistent. It didn't feel consistent because when it started out, in the beginning and the end of the film, we used them outside of the house in Reykjavik. And when it started, it was like, okay, we're doing this kind of mockumentary feel with the zooms here. This is going to be what the style of the film is. And then the rest of the film was more traditionally shot. And then again, at the end, we had those kind of zooms. And I guess it was trying to imitate, just for that setup, a news crew style look and feel. I would have preferred the traditional, non-zoom, maybe more push-in style throughout the entirety of it.
I mean, I go the other way and say I think I like that idea. They should lean into it more. Because there are points in which they use some archival footage in ways that some of it feels kind of out of context. And so if they just leaned in and said, everything that the public can see, we're going to shoot it like we're shooting we're going to shoot it from the point of view of the news cameras. Or we're going to do, make that an active style choice that you're doing. And then when you're behind closed doors, you go to the traditional shooting.
I could see that. I think, maybe just being a little bit more consistent with it. I just happen to prefer the non-docu style look personally. That's just a preference of mine. But overall, I think it was really well done. Another cinematography, more of an editing and cinematography choice was, I was intrigued by a couple of the points in which we were doing the table scene. We had two individuals, like two single shots on screen at the same time with like a airplane window seam in the middle.
Yeah,
in the sense of like just black screen. It was
interesting.
interesting.
Ask you about that. What do you think about that choice?
To me, I was like, why don't we just have this as a wide? Maybe it was because they wanted to frame the fact that there was a literal division between the two of them at that point. Maybe it was more of a technical thing that, we just couldn't do a wide in that room like that. I don't know what the reason was exactly. Fine. I didn't dislike it, but to me it was like, we could have just had a regular wide.
I specifically just don't like when filmmakers do multiple frames in frame. Like the one that's always driven me nuts is in the movie X-Men First Class during the training montage at the mansion. There's like 6 different, the different, and there's bars between them all and showing different characters doing different things, and they slide over and I'm like, that just takes me right out of it. That reminds me that I'm watching an artifice. I would have rather they do a wide. If they can't do a wide, like come up with something else. But when you do that, and the audio mix was jarring when they cut to that too. If you can't do a wide, figure out another creative way to just show in camera that they're divided or that they are both in the, like, I don't know. I was like, it didn't feel like it had enough of a purpose to be worth the detriment to my immersion that it caused.
That's fair. And like, I don't mind when they do the split screen stuff in certain instances. It just, there it felt more jarring than impactful.
I guess there's times when it can be where it can flow well, like when Harry Met Sally when they do the phone calls. They're Carrie Fisher and I forget the actor who's the other friend, but they're sitting in bed and one of them's talking on one phone. They have two phones. They have two landlines in their bedroom for whatever reason, and that flows pretty well because I think it's motivated. Like we understand why the frame's moving over, and we're getting another frame of what the hell is Mike Wazowski's name? Billy Crystal. Good Lord.
I love that you know him as Mike Wazowski, because I did not know that he voiced Mike Wazowski. If I had thought, I've never thought about who voiced Mike Wazowski before. Now it makes perfect sense. But I just love that that's your go-to for Billy Crystal. Not how many times he's hosted the Oscars. Not literally any other film he's been in. Mike Wazowski.
The whole time I'm explaining the scene, I'm like, I'm like, I have Mike Wazowski in my brain blinking, and I'm like, actor.
That's incredible.
Anyway, so there's a rationale of when the other actor picks up the phone and the frame moves over and this other frame of Billy Crystal comes in that you can follow. Okay, I know why this is happening. Fincher talks about how like he can't stand when the camera moves when it's not motivated. He's like, why are you moving the camera? If you move the camera because you're panning to the right because I opened a door and the camera is then gonna look out the door. Well, that's motivated by something. There's something happening physically in the scene that where you would want to know what's going on in a different spot. But if you just kind of move the camera willy-nilly, it doesn't feel purposeful. It doesn't feel intentional. And so I think that if there are ways that you could do the, different frames in the split screen, but this one, there was no transition into it that felt motivated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Anything else that you had on Brink of War other than, like, because for me, it just, the overarching thoughts, I don't have a lot of detailed comments on it other than I thought the performances were stellar, interesting story, really enjoyed it. I thought the cinematography and the direction was overall really solid, but overall, a lot of it is the element that I think the film speaks for itself. And there's not much I can add to it other than saying I would recommend going to see it. I think it's a worthwhile watch. I think the setting's really cool. I mean, a lot of this was kind of predetermined based on the actual historical events. I think it does a really good job of giving both sides of the aisle ability to converse with each other, quite literally. And I think that's valuable for everybody in this day and age of a film in which two extremes are essentially coming together to find common ground. I think that's really important in 2026 and moving forward. But beyond that, I think it's a film that is really well done, really well made, is a good product in the end, and I think is worth watching.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely recommend people give it a watch. Fair warning, I think the first 20 minutes, half an hour are probably the weakest in terms of lots of expository dialogue, a lot of just kind of reminding you what the movie is about more times than it needs to. I think that other similar films like The Sunset Limited, which we both like, there was a really good movie about 2.5 years ago called Freud's Last Session, where it's like these films that are based around two people conversing with each other, they kind of succeed or fail, I think, based on the quality of the dialogue and the performances as well. But a lot of it is the dialogue, and I feel like that element of it improves as the film goes on. I would say the start is slow, but once we're fully into the summit and we're deep into it, I think there's some really compelling things that the characters say. And so I'd recommend people go and give it a look. In general, the movie has a very compelling arc, which is Reagan saying to Scholes, I've spent so much money and resources expanding the military and expanding our ability to defend ourselves and to fight in other places. I did this with the idea that it would be a big stick that we could prevent war with. And he comes to realize at the beginning of the film that because him doing that has escalated the Cold War so much in the 80s, he might actually have caused a war while trying so hard to prevent one. And that is a fantastic arc that is undermined by the authentically portrayed real-life decisions that Reagan made over the course of that meeting. And so it's in some ways a tragedy, but it is one that ends on a note of encouragement to treat one another in the same way that they did, and the fact that they were, even after having a meeting that went to hell, were able to shake hands on the front stoop and were able to reconvene again to have a more productive summit later. I think that's a great thing to walk out of a theater with.
Agreed. And speaking of having a great time walking out of the theater, at least for one of us, let's swap over to The End of Oak Street, which we have much more differing opinions about.
Yeah, we do. So The End of Oak Street, the premise of the film is pretty straightforward. There is some kind of wormhole type event that takes a suburban neighborhood in, I believe, 1982, and transports it to the age of the dinosaurs, which period is sort of, I don't know my dinosaurs well enough to, should have asked Kat that before we left the other day, but essentially is transported into prehistoric times, and they need to survive dinosaurs. And marries with that some family drama and some marital drama and things like that. But fundamentally is action movie with dinosaurs.
I loved it. I absolutely loved The End of Oak Street. I thought, you know what, this is exactly what should be in theaters right now. This is the type of movie that reminds me of the 90s, when we could have something ridiculous happen, but still have a really heartfelt, heartwarming, and genuine storyline of the characters within a ridiculous premise. And it all feels weird. It all feels real. It all works. There's the right payoffs when they need to happen. And overall, I really enjoyed it. This is the kind of thing that I was so glad I went and saw in a theater instead of waiting for it to come out on streaming, because these are the types of movies that I want to support. I want to see more unique, independent stories like this that aren't tied to an IP, that are just fun, that they're good. They're still going to tear at your heartstrings a little bit, but it's a good premise. It's fun. It's modern, despite the fact that it's in 1982. There are elements of this is a real family drama that is relevant even to today. That there are problems here that exist within familial dynamics that need solutions. And this was a great externalization of that family drama and the solution to their problems, and finding that solution within each other and things like that, and within cooperating with each other. I thought it was great. The effects were great. Especially for what it is, I think the effects were really well done.
Yeah, they kind of did run into this situation a little bit where they need to spend the lion's share of their VFX budget on the dinosaurs. Otherwise, the movie will kind of instantly be unsuccessful in terms of immersion. That they ended up having to do things like kind of green screen some shots of Ewan McGregor just standing in front of a house. And I tend to lean towards, all right, well, you could have at least used a back lot. I've been to the Warner Brothers lot. You could have gone out and it would have cost money, obviously, but you could have just got out in front of one of their rows of empty houses. And in general, that's my thoughts on the green screen reliance. But
talk about your thoughts on the film.
Yeah, okay. So I'll do that. So I think talked about the VFX. The other thing that I'll just kind of get right out of the gate in terms of a thing I enjoyed about the film was the acting.
The performances were stellar.
Yeah, Anne Hathaway and Ewan McGregor elevate the movie so much just with the way that they dig into the disputes that they're having and the emotions undergirding it, right? It's not necessarily that they're oh, these are great argument scenes. It is simply just two people that have a lot of emotional baggage that they are then trying to get out towards each other in an effective way, and it's not working because we're people and we can't really consistently, we can't always perfectly express ourselves, especially in the context of a marriage or other long-term relationship. Christian Convery, who was the son, did a good job. Child performances are infamously hit or miss, and I think he did great. The daughter was Maisie Stella, who I loved in My Old Ass, which is a comedy about a girl who, I think she's like a senior in high school or around the cusp of adulthood, and she is camping with her friends and has a bad trip on shrooms, and sees her 39-year-old older self, who is Aubrey Plaza. And so they play off each other really well in that movie. I also liked her in this film. So yeah, I think that's the stuff that I really enjoyed. We're seeing those people act. The problem that the film has for me is that whenever you have something, whenever I go into a movie that is really, really based around a full-length homage to films that have come before it, which this is very much so for Steven Spielberg. There's a lot of, obviously, we're going to compare it to Jurassic Park because it's a dinosaur movie, but also Close Encounters, which I think you mentioned when we saw it, and even just a little bit of, I think, E.T. in just the sense of, like, this is a suburban family. It's dealing with the underside of the nuclear family lifestyle. So there's a lot of Spielberg in this, and J. Abrams has been doing this his whole career.
Yeah. He's basically Spielberg Jr.
Yeah, essentially. At least that's his intent. Sometimes it's more effective than others. But but the question that I always ask when I come across a movie like this is, what are you going to offer me that I wouldn't find in the things that you're homaging? Example of this is the Batman, which I like. And the Batman has Seven and Zodiac written all over it. And so I go into that and go like, okay, I've seen similar serial killer movies before. This is very stylistically derived. What are you going to give me that's not Seven or Zodiac? And the answer is it's Batman, right? Like, you can watch other people solve Fincher mysteries. You can't watch Batman solve a Fincher mystery anywhere else. And when you bring the psychology and the character of Batman into a mystery like this, it's going to produce a different result than you're going to get from having Somerset and Mills or Robert Graysmith do it. I didn't feel like there was anything like that for me here. The stuff that I did like, the way that the actors communicated the family drama and the emotional underpinnings of the film, all felt like, okay, yeah, that one, I get that from E.T. I get that from Jurassic Park. I get that from Close Encounters. And I kept kind of waiting for there to be something, because it's not tied to an IP. It's not tied to one of these other things. It's not Spielberg. It's David Robert Mitchell directing with Abrams producing. And I kept waiting for the thing, especially given that Robert Mitchell, David Robert Mitchell is a solid director. He did It Follows and Under the Silver Lake, which are interesting films. And so I was like, all right, what's the thing? What's the thing? And it just never really came about for me.
What kind of thing do you think you were looking for this film?
I think I was looking for... So you've got this premise, right? It's not just a dinosaur movie. There aren't just dinosaurs in a normal place. It's time travel. They've been brought back to prehistoric times. If you have to survive in prehistoric times as a suburban family from the 80s, there's an argument to be made that getting eaten by a dinosaur is the least of your problems, because that's an incredibly hostile environment. We could even get as deep into the weeds as there's going to be bacteria around at that point that your immune system isn't prepared for, but there's going to be basic elements of survival is the big thing. And they address it in dialogue a little bit, but it doesn't feel like we really explore the realities of what that's going to do to your immediate needs of life. It reminded me of something we talked about in the Lore Lads episode with Mattis about prepping, where Mattis said something I think pretty insightful, which was, in an apocalyptic scenario, the thing you're going to be doing the most of more than anything else is hiking. the specific analogy was it's going to be more like what Frodo and Sam do in The Lord of the Rings than what Aragorn does in The Lord of the Rings. And you know, it's not going to be an action movie so much as it's going to be a survival movie where you may have to engage in action to protect yourself, depending on what specifically the threat is, in this case, dinosaurs. I would have liked to have seen more of that, because the thing that I think about dinosaur movies is, and I have examples for this, I don't think we're going to get to a point where we make getting chased by dinosaurs more exciting and interesting than it already is. And I think Jurassic World, that sequel franchise, has been the biggest proof of that, because the first Jurassic World movie is like, all right, well, we've done 3 movies of getting chased by dinosaurs. What if, here's how we escalate it. What if you're getting chased by a dinosaur that can blend in like a chameleon? Okay. But then it's getting chased by dinosaurs. That you change that one thing and the rest of it is getting chased by dinosaurs. In the most recent Jurassic World film, okay, here's how we escalate it. I can see them in the executives in the room when they're trying to develop this. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make it bigger. How are we going to do that? It's not going to be dinosaurs. It's going to be genetic dinosaur experiments from a lab that are artificial, in addition to the regular dinosaurs. And then the movie's still just getting chased by dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that sort of happened with that franchise is, think about the first Jurassic Park. Not that much of that movie is actually getting chased by dinosaurs. A lot of it is other stuff. And there's, as the movie goes on, there's more dinosaur stuff. Early on, we see Newman from Seinfeld getting eaten by those things, the ones that can spit the venom. But then as the movie goes on, there's more of, okay, we have to, deal with the T-Rex, we have to deal with the velociraptors and that sort of thing. But it's fundamentally spending more time on the dramatic interplay of the characters than it is on the set pieces with the dinosaurs. And as the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World franchises go on, the ratio becomes more of the other direction. It becomes, I think Dominion is the Jurassic World one, where you're kind of basically always doing dinosaur set pieces and spending very little time on dramatic, not zero, but much less time on the interaction with the characters and the characterization. And I think that when you are dealing with something that's as nailed down as dinosaurs, getting chased by dinosaurs, you've got it. You have it right there. You know what it is. The thing that's going to interest me is all the other stuff. I'm going to enjoy the action scenes with the dinosaurs. I don't know anybody that doesn't enjoy dinosaurs in action movies. But it's going to be, the movie is going to succeed or fail for me in the gaps between those set pieces. And what I think, and so this film does stuff that's not dinosaur chases. Obviously, we have the just to go right into spoilers, we have the husband who is unemployed, but he isn't admitting that he's unemployed. He's just saying, oh, I have to pick up more stuff at my side job, but he's not admitting that his full-time job is gone.
I will say, when this movie initially started, I thought that was going to be cover for him cheating on his wife. when he said, I have to go, I have to work a little extra, I thought it was going to be, there's going to be this weird like subplot where there's infidelity and that's going to cause problems with them, and then they have to heal that. I'm glad they didn't go that far.
Yeah, that would have just, I think, muddied it a lot.
Agreed.
I think the job thing makes a lot of sense, because this is 1982. This is a time in which, men are the breadwinners. They have control of families' finances. This is something that certainly happened, and certainly is believable that this would be a crisis he would go on. It wouldn't become apparent for several weeks. And he would sort of, he would, how do I put this? He would sort of just be like, oh, I'm the man, I have to figure it out. And not really admit that he needs help, or admit that there's a problem that he can't solve just through force of will.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got that secret going on. She's a writer. She's written this novel that sort of externalizes a lot of her dissatisfactions with the marriage. you do have stuff like this, but in many ways, it's something that I've seen before, if not in a Spielberg film, certainly in other similar movies. The unemployed breadwinner dad is a stock character we've seen a lot before. The PJ Byrne who from Oppenheimer, who's the annoying neighbor, is the stock annoying neighbor we've seen before. I would contrast this with a very similar movie in premise, or at least in structure, maybe not in premise, but similar movie in structure, which is A Quiet Place. Where you're in an apocalyptic scenario. There are these alien creatures that they hunt by extremely sensitive hearing. If you make a noise like you tap on the table too loud or you step on a twig, they'll just show up like that and eat you. And that's also one where it's much more like the earlier Jurassic Parks and the later Jurassic Worlds. Most of the movie isn't these creatures. Most of the movie is this family having to kind of adapt their life around, or us seeing the ways they've adapted their life around the fact that they can't make any noise or they'll die. And you have it makes use of the fact that it frees up so much screen time for drama over action, that you get these interesting dynamics of, you have the husband, John Krasinski. He has a soundproof basement where he tries to make these like sonic weapons where he can weaponize sound waves to fight them. You have Emily Blunt, the mom, who's 9 months pregnant, and she has to figure out, how am I going to give birth completely silently? Mm-hmm. You have the daughter who is deaf, right? And so she can't she can't tell if she's making noise or not. There's another thing. This is kind of a spoiler. It's a spoiler for the first couple scenes in the film, but there is one. Basically, the deaf girl, while they're scavenging, finds a rocket ship toy and gives it to one of her little brothers. There's 3 siblings. And what she doesn't know, because she's deaf, is the fact that it's not just a rocket ship, it's a rocket ship that lights up and makes sound. And so the little brother actually gets eaten right away. Mm. And so the fact that like she has the guilt over that, and her father realizing like, oh, this is a liability to us, the fact that she can't hear, that there's all this interesting drama and all of these characters who have these unique characteristics about them that inform how are they going to move through this world. And it's the moving through this new world that they live in that defines the movie more so than the actual fighting or evading of the aliens. And so I think that the stuff that even apart from all the Spielberg stuff, the stuff that I really liked in this movie was all stuff that was more thoroughly explored and executed in A Quiet Place.
I can see where you're coming from with that. I think because there were definitely elements while watching it where I was like, there's an interesting level of detail here that I think could have gone an extra step. Like, for example, we see, gentle spoilers, we see a Spinosaurus following Anne Hathaway and Ewan McGregor's characters, and we see it sniffing the air, but it gives up on them, takes a drink of water, and moves on. It would have been interesting to see the reason it gives up on them is because they realize it's sniffing for them, and they have to find a solution to cover their scent in order to do that. And like, there were points where I was like, if we were in survival mode here in this movie, first thing I would be doing is going next door to take from that giant pile of dinosaur shit and laying it around like the externals of my house to cover my scent, to make sure that even though I'm in the house, all of the creatures outside of it don't consider this somewhere worth going because it smells like excrement, nothing else. So yeah, I could see where there are elements of that would have elevated the film. But also at the same time, I felt like though that would have been a benefit, it didn't need that elevation, at least for me, on first watch. On first watch, this was enough. Something that I just thought of a little bit ago, which is this movie is basically an episode of Rick and Morty without Rick. Because Ewan McGregor is playing an extremely strong version of Jerry.
He very much is Jerry.
So
Jerry.
It is very Jerry. Anne Hathaway is playing Beth, and the 2 kids are basically Morty and Summer. And they even have a dog, which, like in season 1 of Rick and Morty, they have a dog. Rick's just not there.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, and I didn't think of it being a Rick and Morty thing at the time, but I was looking for that character. I was like, where's the Burt Gummer of this movie? Where's the survivalist who?
Where's Michael Caine in Journey of the Mysterious Island?
Yeah. Like, where's the character that was waiting for this to happen and is thriving in this environment that has like an arsenal in the basement and is now hunting dinosaurs?
And PJ Byrne would have played that guy so well.
Remind me who PJ Byrne is?
He's the guy who quits in Oppenheimer. I can't work like this.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He's the angry neighbor. That guy being like a prepper who's like got all these guns and all these unperishable food and like gets really gung-ho about like he can hunt dinosaurs now. He would have been perfect for that role.
Yeah.
That character would have been so natural for him.
Yeah.
That now that you've pointed out, it really disappoints me.
And it would have been a fun detail because I would have loved to have seen, because we know from the film, assume it's all spoilers from this point forward, even though it was also spoilers ahead of this. Considering that we know that at the end of the film, Anne Hathaway's character is able to save certain people, but not everyone. We know that no matter what, there are people that are still trapped there.
Yeah.
It would have been really fun to see at the end of the film that prepper person who has been excited about now getting the chance to hunt the biggest game in the world that he didn't get the chance to before is like roasting a Spinosaurus leg over a fire, like and munching on it.
He's got the other guys that are stuck there organized,
Yes.
and they're setting up a camp and
Yeah,
whatever.
and like I would totally watch a sequel that was just him and the group like surviving in this environment now and like creating a Walking Dead style community in the middle of 2 million years ago or 200 million years ago.
And it would have been cool for that character. Because he's the stock annoying neighbor, and there isn't a lot of like payoff or like interesting way they go with him. It would have been really cool to give him some more emotionality, to give him some more, I guess, pathos. If the reason he's such a cranky neighbor is because he feels like this 1980s suburban life is a prison, and he has this desire for adventure and this desire for a more robust existence. What did Theodore Roosevelt call it? The strenuous life, right? Like he has that desire in him, but because of whatever limitations in his circumstances are, he can't have that. And it is really just disaffected. And almost this kind of like Ed Norton in Fight Club sense of like, I have all this stuff, but because I live in such a repressed world, I don't know what to do with it. And so I take it out by being a dick to my neighbors. If you show him thrive throughout this whole movie as the Rick character, and then you get to the end, they've got the portal, and Anne Hathaway and the kids are like, okay, yep, we can go back. Maybe they kind of figure out through the portal, like, oh, this is earlier in the day. We can go back and we can fix this. And he just goes, no, I'm not going.
Well,
Like,
or
this is what I was made for. This is where I'm thriving. I'm gonna take care of these people. I'm gonna kill dinosaurs, and it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. I would love that. But that's a slightly different movie. And I still, though that would have been really fun to see, for me personally, the movie still worked. I liked the family dynamic. I liked, them kind of coming together through these externalized, obstacles in the world that makes them realize that their internal problems are as a result of themselves and their behaviors, and they have the power to change that for each other. And a lot of it just has to do with honesty and trust. And I really liked that. I really liked that element of the movie. That's part of the reason why I thought it worked for me personally. Is I like the fact that we're kind of doing a, it's a family. What did Kat say in the way out? It's like it's a marriage story with a positive ending brought about by the existence of dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And it's like, very much so. It's if a marriage story existed surrounded by dinosaurs, and those dinosaurs made everybody realize, shit, we're being idiots.
Which is also a very Rick and Morty thing of so much of how they've gotten, at this point, like 8 seasons of Jerry and Beth briefly separating, but them still continuing to have some semblance of a functional marriage, is the fact that when these crazy things brought about by Rick happen, or one of them gets transported elsewhere, or there ends up being a second Beth, or all these different crises that they go through, the two of them find something in those experiences that make them realize, like, oh, I do need this other person. As much as they drive me up a wall, as much as for Jerry, Beth intimidates me and makes me feel insecure about myself as a man, and Beth, for as much as Jerry is a pain in the ass, and as much as he doesn't take responsibility for his own life and his own emotions and all the other flaws that Jerry has, there's something about each other that we want to have with us while we deal with all this crazy shit. And so I think that would be an amazing thing for somebody to ask David Robert Mitchell on the press tour, is like, is this Rick and Morty? Because I completely missed that, that you pointed out, but such an interesting parallel there.
Even with the time travel element, and portals, less the time travel, more the portals bit.
Well, I mean, you totally could see that there's the whole Rick and the family end up on a prehistoric type planet, and that's the episode. Like, you could totally
yes,
there are episodes that are very similar to that as it stands.
Yep.
It is kind of interesting through line that both of these films kind of have this. Is going to get into the Nancy Reagan aspect of the Brink of War, which we didn't really touch on too much. It is interesting that both of these films kind of have this sort of, one more thoroughly so than the other, but this interesting gender roles angle to them. Where Nancy Reagan, part of her in real life, part of her image was she was just a very traditional housewife.
Mm-hmm.
People talked about the gaze, that she would just, Ronald Reagan would be speaking and she'd just be like looking at him dreamily or whatever. And that was kind of this image that she had. And then you read stories from people that knew her, interacted with her personally. Like, there's a really good book called The Residence by Kate Anderson Brower that talks about the residential staff at the White House. And it talks about how, one of the women who worked there for like years and years ended up quitting because she couldn't work with Nancy Reagan. And the story she tells of how Nancy Reagan totally wore the pants in the marriage on the inside, but because of their image that they needed to present for Reagan to be a successful politician, she took on this more submissive housewife role to him. It's interesting that The Brink of War portrays that image uncritically. And it would have been an interesting opportunity.
I find it interesting that you consider that it was uncritically.
I think it would have been interesting to... It would have been interesting to see a little bit of her, either almost like adopting a certain posture with Ronald, and then hanging up, and the way she speaks to her staff is much more dominant. Or maybe some reporter comes up to her and she does her shtick, and then when she's on the phone with Ronald, that's when she goes into more of her unfiltered self. Like, it would have been cool to see a little bit more interrogation of that, but it felt like the movie, the fact that it's produced by conservative Christians, kind of portrays Nancy Reagan that way on her face.
See, I thought the commentary was really well done in exactly what you were talking about through the subplot of the wives. Because Gorbachev's wife is the epitomization of what you're describing Nancy's public image was, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas everything that we see Nancy doing, every time she hangs up the phone with Ron,
she's working, essentially.
She is making new moves for herself in doing something that actually tangibly makes a difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that did a really good job of essentially showing where she differs from that, persona of the housewife, where she's not even there, because she's essentially so busy not being that.
Yeah, it's fair. I think it's a little bit more of like the actions versus the personality, or the actions that she takes in that subplot versus maybe the characterization and the performance of her. You're right that it is kind of this interesting foil there between the two wives, that one of them is sort of dutifully there for Gorbachev, but she's kind of doing photo ops. She's not doing anything that could even remotely be considered policy. She's just there to kind of be a personality for the benefit of the, for lack of a better term, administration that she's married into. Whereas Nancy Reagan is working all the time, but it feels like there could have been more characterization of the different, like public versus private Nancy Reagan. that you would have had to make sacrifices for. I personally think you probably could have done away with the spies in the basement and then spent more time on the reporters and the wives, because I liked that of the two kind of side plots. That was the one I thought was more interesting. But yeah, no, it's interesting that that movie deals with that aspect of gender roles, and the end of Oak Street inverts the gender roles, and they're 4 years apart in setting, which is interesting. It's very similar expectations of gender roles at this time, if not identical. And you have in the end of Oak Street this, inversion of like, well, the ideal of the time was the guy's making all the money. He's got all the finance under control. The wife has no line of sight to any of that. But he's unemployed and lying about it, and he needs to deliver pizzas 24/7 to maintain the illusion that he's still gainfully employed. But he's also kind of like panicking at the wheel because he doesn't know how to rectify his situation. And then you have this woman who is clearly very intrinsically motivated to do the thing that matters to her, which is writing her novel, but doesn't get or really seemingly want any credit for that, at least not in the eyes of the power balance of the marriage. She doesn't, because she's writing about the marriage, but like she doesn't seem to say like, oh, okay, I want to like fight to get the respect I deserve from you because I'm doing this thing that is much more ambitious than what you're doing. We don't get that aspect of it. But by the end of the film, she does pivot to a different book, and she does become the breadwinner. They're in a much nicer house at the end of the film. She does have her career put together.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really astute recognition, and I think it's a fun interplay between the two films, because they do, while having the elements that you're describing, they portray them in very different ways, obviously, but also it's an interesting inversion because they both kind of seem to come at different conclusions about it.
Definitely.
And I think it's a fun way to look at the different routes in relationship dynamics, because it's very clear that the movie Brink of War depicts Nancy and Ron having a very good relationship, but it has its own problems. It has its own very unique problems as a result of them being president and first lady.
But neither of them are really portrayed as being discontent with the state of their marriage. Like she appears to be very content to be somebody who is in persona a traditional housewife that stays to the side while silently, or maybe not silently, but more subtly doing the work that matters to her, as opposed to being somebody that is dissatisfied with the fact that she can't be an equal to Ronald.
Yeah, whereas the inverse is kind of happening with Ewan McGregor and Anne Hathaway's characters. So it's, in a way, it's a kind of a fun double feature if you want to look at it from a relationship dynamics perspective.
It's, I was not expecting that there would be anything remotely similar about these. I was like, well, I think we're just going to cover these in one episode because they're both out at the same time. But ended up being, I'm curious to see if Tony and Can't Miasma have any common threads that we can point out.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So I feel like we've had a really good discussion about the films themselves, in their production, in the portrayals of the different characters within them, and things like that. But I know there's some interesting elements, particularly about Brink of War, that extend beyond the film itself. And I know Angel Studios is kind of, for some people, maybe a little bit of a controversial studio. Their films represent more than just the films themselves for people. And I know you have more information about that than I do.
Yeah, so kind of like we got into a little bit earlier, obviously they've kind of had this shadow of Sound of Freedom, that Caviezel overplayed his hand so much with the kind of tenuous political connection that film has, because fundamentally you look at the plot of the movie, there's nothing really overtly partisan that character is engaging in. He's going to another country to rescue a kid from trafficking. Like, he's not necessarily dealing in that film with questions of the activities that some of our political leaders have been found to have been engaging in, right? In a way that you would expect from a movie that does have this much controversy associated with it. And I think that there are examples like Sketch I mentioned that there was another one that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was in, where she's the coach of some sort of robotics team. I didn't watch that film, but there are other examples of movies where they kind of step out into stuff that we can all get behind. Like, fundamentally, an all-girls robotics team from the Middle East in countries where women aren't supposed to be getting educated. I believe that's the premise of the film. That's not something that really should be partisan. We can all kind of cheer for that. There are a couple sycophantic people that are, oh, it's a girl power, girl boss movie. And okay, those people don't matter. Generally, liberal, conservative, you're going to look at that and go, hell yeah. You're going to look at a story about a little girl learning how to overcome her grief for her mom and go, hell yeah. That's not true of all their projects. And, you know, for as much as The Brink of War does things that I think are constructive about you giving Gorbachev a platform and giving him a voice and giving him humanity, there is kind of still this soapbox at the end that we're kind of left on, that Reagan's like, I don't really care about compromise with this guy. I don't really care about peace with this guy. He says a line, I'm going to somewhat paraphrase, that's, there'll be peace when they are gone, referring to the Soviets. There'll be peace when the Soviets are gone. And that monologue in particular, you could really tell, okay, like this is being written for all of the efforts that the writer or writers undertook to give dimensionality and nuance to this conflict. This is clearly the monologue of somebody who is taking a side within the movie, essentially writing the movie into taking a side within itself. And that's something that I think is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, problems with the faith-based film space. Because for as much as Angel Studios has, as I said, upped its game on production value, upped its game on cast, upped its game in a number of areas versus something like the Kendrick Brothers films or the God's Not Dead films or the, you know, and so on and so forth, that are rightfully criticized for not being very good as films and mainly being ideological mouthpieces. It still is just plagued by this thing that every, or almost every film needs to have an altar call. And it's not necessarily a literal altar call. There are plenty of those in Christian movies too, but an altar call to whatever it is that the movie's supposed to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be frustrating. Even when I agree, in the cases when I do agree with the message, it can be frustrating, right? Because as many of these conservative Christians, you know, who are fans of this type of movie will readily say, they don't like when films made in Hollywood by generally liberals do this thing. It's a understandable point of agitation when people go in to sit and watch a Marvel movie or what have you, and 3/4 of the way through, somebody gives a speech that is in everything but, you know, eyeline a fourth wall break, and essentially makes some sort of speech to the audience about something that is a real life thing less than it's a diegetic thing within the movie. But then there's some hypocrisy because then they expect their Christian conservative movies to do that.
I have two things to say about that. One of them is longer, and I will cover second. But the first is, speaking of fourth wall breaks in all but eyeline, there was a fourth wall break in Brink of War with eyeline.
Yes, J.K. Simmons right at the end.
There was a second one earlier in the film, and it was Jeff Daniels as Reagan in conversation with J.K. Simmons. And he was talking about the reasons he was there. And then he looks at the camera with his eyes and he says, at the time, I believed this to be true, or something.
Oh, I was like note taking about the warmongering stuff during that. So I know,
yeah, so
I know where you mean.
It was really interesting because it was a really subtle thing. And it was almost as if instead of looking directly into the lens, he looked just off lens.
It's like what Nicholson does in The Shining a little bit.
Yeah, and so it was like, you know, you got that feeling where it was like, oh, he's looking at me right now, isn't he? But it doesn't quite feel like he's definitely looking at me. It may have been directly into the lens, but it just, in the moment, it felt like it was just off lens enough to keep it from technically being a fourth wall break, but it very much felt like one. And it was very interesting, very, very interesting choice. I think it worked. It was a little jarring. I think it worked for what it was, and I kind of appreciate the sparing use of it. But that brings me to my second point, which is people in audiences who watch films like that tend to dislike grandstanding monologues purely because nobody likes being preached at. And it's in basically every screenwriting book ever written that if you're going to have your protagonist or your antagonist or whoever proclaiming what is right or wrong, you kind of have to do it indirectly. You can't have a character essentially say, you know, this is morally correct, this is the right thing to do, unless it's a villain talking about something that is from the movie and protagonist's perspective and likely the audience's perspective very definitively not morally correct. But the reason why you're doing that is because you're presenting their argument in the clearest way to A, show their line of thought and see how someone could get to that conclusion, but also the faults in the line of thought and why, as an audience, we shouldn't be thinking that. But having your protagonist do it, having somebody that you're supposed to be rooting for do it, usually feels unnecessary or over the top, purely because no one likes being preached to. And I think that's what this film does pretty well, as opposed to some of the things that you're referencing previously about other Angel Studios films. And the reality is that it's present in Hollywood films too. I mean, there are plenty of Hollywood movies that do this that people did not react positively to, or didn't do it. They successfully kept things relatively under the radar or indirect enough where even if they're talking about it in a monologue, it's under the surface of the water enough to where it's digestible and it's appreciable.
Yeah, I think the gold standard for this is Fight Club of all things, because there is a very strong sociopolitical message that's being communicated. Fincher himself describes it as a polemic. He watching through the commentary for Seven, he refers to Seven as more of a real movie and Fight Club as more of like political communication. But it's also just a very entertaining and well-made film. And so a smart person that views it is going to be able to parse out what is this thing that is being argued to me. But they're also going to appreciate that it's just a very well-made film that presents its message in a way that's artistic and not preachy, or isn't trying to hit you over the head with a lecture and make you either feel good about your beliefs or feel bad about your beliefs, depending on where you fall. It leaves you walking out of the theater chewing on something to sort of take apart what was shown to you and react to it as you see fit. And Fincher has a principle that he talks about where in an argument, everyone should be right in a movie. That's what makes argument scenes really good.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this throughout his films. And this movie did this, I think, very well. I think this principle of like, yeah, Gorbachev is kind of right most of the time. His points are logical and consistent. The same thing's true of Reagan. However, with the monologue of there'll be no peace until they're gone, Reagan gives that to Scholes, and Gorbachev is not given an opportunity in the movie to respond.
Mm-hmm.
He barely has any more lines for the rest of the film. So to me, it's something that they were doing correctly and doing it in the way that I wish more faith-based films would attempt to do. And more films across the board would try to do when they deal with political messages. But then at the very end, they can't resist the temptation to get on a soapbox. And I think that's a massive detriment to the movie. And it is the same problem that they're going to have to fix one of these days if they ever want to be taken as seriously as the mainstream studios are taking.
I think that's totally fair, and I think it's something that everybody can learn from who is attempting to write stories even in and beyond filmmaking. And I think being able to find ways to communicate the lesson that you're trying to convey, because every good story has a lesson. Every story has a lesson, whether you're intending it or not. You know, no matter what you write, there is a moral lesson, there is a theme, there is something to that.
Themes.
The key to being a good writer is intentionality, is making sure that whatever the theme is in your story, you're aware of it, so that way you don't create contradicting elements of your theme, you don't confuse the audience, and also you're capable of, once you recognize what it is, being intentional about it, you also be intentional about doing it in a subversive and metaphorical way, in a way that is not preachy, in a way that is not over the top, in a way that is not direct, in a way that is very story-like.
And in as a point in The End of Oak Street's favor, I think it does that with its gender roles commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Anne Hathaway doesn't get on a soapbox and say, well, damn you for being a patriarchal, guy that isn't, living up to his responsibilities. And if I was the breadwinner, if I was the one in charge of the family, we'd be on a better track. She doesn't say that. She kind of means it.
Yeah, when she says, can you not drink because I need you here right now?
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's kind of being the head of the household in every way that matters at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of the film, that becomes like literalized, is that she is the one who is providing for the family. And at no point did I feel like that was being said to me in the form of a non-fictional speech.
Mm-hmm.
That was completely that flowed completely into the story in an organic way. I got the point because I know how to watch movies, and it's not super ambiguous. It's not very ambiguous, but it's shown to you, not told to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the difference. It's fundamentally all comes back to show, don't tell. Even if it's in dialogue, show it, don't tell it.